Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's Josh from Crack MTG here, and today I'm running my Premodern deck, Blue-White Tide Control, through a Tier 1 Gauntlet. What does this mean? I made this post to the MTG Premodern Discord, asking to try to play against Tier 1 decks of the format so that I could show off to you guys how sideboarding works, different favorability for matchups, and overall show off the insane diversity of the format, and also show off how strong this deck is in the current meta. I'm considering tier 1 decks to be any decks that have around 3% or above on MTG top 8. So for example, Goblin, Sly, Elves, Blue-Green Madness, Red-Green Oath, Blue-White Landstill, Recurring Nightmare Survival, Mono-Blue Control, maybe Black-White Control, Stifle Knot. All of these decks are kind of the most common decks that you will see at pre-modern tournaments, so I want to show off how this deck will perform against them. I will only have each matchup covered once, and today we have Replenish, Burn, and Blue-Green Madness. I'm running a very similar 75 to the one I made my last video on. However, the Disenchant in the sideboard and the main board both became Seal of Cleansings, and I brought the 4th Chain of Vapor out of the deck for the first copy of Kirtar's Desire, which has actually been quite good as a 5th Swords to Plowshares effect. Hope you guys enjoy. Alright, round 1, we're going to keep a kind of sketchy hand. We do need to draw some lands, but we're on the draw. Opponent is playing Burn, starts off with a turn 1 Jackal Pup, definitely one of their strongest plays. We end up finding a second land, which is great. We'll lead on the Coastal Tower, though. Nice to have these 2 swords, however, we are going to be 1 turn slow, and we're going to have to take the 2 damage from the Jackal Pup on this first swing. He ends up playing a Seal of Fire, missing his second land drop, which is pretty important. We end up playing a Fairy Conclave and just passing. I'm holding up Swords to Plowshares here for this pup that tries to come in, and he swings, and of course I swords in combat. He does find the second land, however it's a Barbarian Ring, and he bolts me in his second main phase. We end up drawing a Wrath of God, which is not super helpful in this position. We'll just play the Dust Bowl and pass. Opponent is just passing back, stuck on 2 lands. We draw a 4th land, which is great. We really needed that to open up our hand. I choose not to go for Parallax Tide here. I could, but instead I'm going to go to hold up Counterspell and Swords to Plowshares. I'd rather wait till I have 3 blue so I can Parallax Tide with the Chain of Vapor all in 1 turn. He slams a pup, but I of course have the Swords to Plowshares for perfect removal for this, so there's no need to counter. We find another Dust Bowl, and I'm actually going to fire this off immediately, killing the Barbarian Ring and putting my opponent down to 1 land. Now even if he draws a land, it's still shutting off Ball Lightnings and Sulfuric Vortexes. He does find a second land and just plays it and passes. We find a 5th land in our plains. We'll just pass back though. We're still waiting for another blue so we can Tide Chain. He passes back, we hit another land. So I mean we're really advantaged here when we're in this kind of pass back and forth game and we're consistently hitting land drops. He ends up incinerating on my end step, which is not great, but I don't think it's worth using a counter on. Puts me down to 12, which is definitely a dangerously low life total against Burn, with this Seal of Fire making me essentially at 10. Slams a second Seal of Fire, so I'm now essentially at 8 with 5 in hand against the Burn player, which is rough. I draw Humility, which I end up casting, still holding up my 1 counter spell, although with just 1 counter spell, it's looking a little bit rough. Burn is definitely a slightly unfavorable matchup. Opponent plays another Seal of Fire. Usually they're just a little bit too fast. We have good sideboard hate against them, but usually there's just a little bit too much for the blue-white player to deal with. We find another blue source, so we're able to go for our Tide Chain combo. First, of course, exiling my own 3 lands, because I'm only going for 2 of my opponents, and then holding priority, activating twice, and Chain of Vaporing to permanently exile their 2 lands, bringing back our 3. They have a Fire Blast, so we are down all the way to 8 with 3 Seal on Fires, making it essentially a 2. They did not have a Lightning Bolt or Shock in hand, because if they did, they had the 1 mana, they would have casted it, and we would have actually been dead here. Because we are not having the extra blue to hold up counterspell. But they missed, and so either even if they drew a land, they wouldn't have had the 1 mana bolt effect, or else they would have already cast it. But they do miss on their land, and we will just swing with both of our man lands. They keep missing on lands, and we're going to keep standing up these lands to keep swinging. They don't really want to pop their Seal of Fires yet. There's too much hope for them to spike and kill us fast. So they're going to use their life total as a resource. The swords in hand now that we picked up, though, will also kind of bolster my life total, because I can swords one of my own manlands, which might be what happens here. He goes for a Seal of Fire on the fairy, but I choose not to swords it. Now just swinging in with the factory, putting him down to 11. He finally does draw a land, however, it's a Barbarian Ring, which is great because we held up enough mana to Dust Bowl that. Doing a pretty good job of keeping our opponent off resources. And then we, of course, have the Swords Plowshares for removal for the Grim Lavamancer. And then I'm just going to stand up my factories and keep on swinging. Although I actually choose to only stand up one factory here, because if he chooses to, if I stand up the second factory, he could Seal of Fire on both of my factories in combat, and then I lose both factories. This instead protects one of the factories, so that both Seal of Fires only kill one factory, which is exactly what happens here. He uses both Seal of Fires, and he's only able to deal with one of my two factories, whereas if I swung with both, he would have lost both, and he concedes. So here for boarding, we are definitely going to be boarding in a lot of our sideboard. We want our 2 blue elemental blasts and 2 hydroblasts. They're really important in order to deal with jackal pups and all of the early game pressure that Burn has. You really need to remove one of their things on turn 1. Seal of Cleansing, because it is great to kill their Curse Scroll, because that is their only out around Cop Red. And of course, we're bringing in our 3 Cop Red. That's kind of our now main game plan. We're actually going to board out of the Tides and a lot of the Tide combo cards, including an island, because my curve is actually so much shifted down and I need the blue so much less now that I don't need triple blue for Tide. Let's see how the board holds up. This hand looks like a keep. It is missing white mana, but we're on the draw, and it's a good mix of lands and spells. We hit an annul, which we're able to actually hold up on turn 1. Our opponent misses their turn 1 creature, which is kind of important for Burn. They really want to have like a turn 1 Jackal Pup or Grim Lavamancer. But our opponent is just content making land drops and passing. We're also very content with that, but we'll do it after Standstill resolves. They don't have a Pyroblast, and instead just Bolt before. We are down to 14 quite quickly, but with no repeatable damage source from a creature, feeling pretty okay. There's the repeatable damage source though. However, cracking our Standstill and finding 2 Seal of Cleansings puts us in a good spot. That blue Elemental Blast off the top also quite strong because it allows an amazing curve here of Seal of Cleansing into hold up blue Elemental Blast. I am a little bit flooded on cards though, so I'm going to need to go to discard, but this Wrath of God is not really doing very much in this matchup most likely. Don't even have the mana to cast it anyway. We'll drop a Dust Bowl and just say go. Like I said, we're very content to make that land drop go game. Hitting a Coastal Tower, which we will play now, and hoping to maybe get a Decree in soon. So now that I've dumped all of the lands from my hand and there's nothing else for me to develop from that, I'm just going to Decree on this end step. However, opponent could have a lot of burn. We are on 13, so I'm only going to go for X's 1, so I'm still holding up Counter Spell. I'm worried about like Price of Progress specifically here. That could get me out of nowhere. And sure enough, opponent does have Price of Progress. We will counter that. Scared of Red Blast here though. Ooh, and opponent has a Pyroblast. So they are going to get their Price of Progress through for 8 damage. That's a lot, and we only have this one soldier. It's going to be a little bit tough. Definitely an uphill battle from here. I'm just going to swing in with the soldier, though, and pass back looking to do this Factor Fiction on their end step. Maybe even Factor Fictioning into a piece of counter magic if they go for something. But instead, we will just go for it on their end step. And they do have another Pyroblast. However, I'm going to blast back because I do think it's very important that I get this Factor Fiction resolving to get more counter magic. They end up splitting the Factor Fiction piles. We're almost always going to be taking the 3, and there, with it having 2 spells, it's just definitely superior. I'm not going to think too long about it if opponent could have done that better. Seal of Cleansing will be coming down for us, and then we can start manning up this factory and swinging with it and the soldier to hopefully start closing out this game rather quickly. 3 a turn, currently 5 turn clock. Opponent plays a Barbarian Ring. We did have the opportunity to potentially Dust Bowl it, but I don't think it's worth it. They would just sacrifice it in response. So instead, we'll just keep manning up the factories and swinging. We are still at a very unhealthy life total, only 5, but they're going to have to use their ring on a Mishra's factory, which we can swords in response so we are actually gaining 2 life off of the interaction. With only 1 card in hand, I feel like I'm able to kind of dump my cards in that way to get a little bit of extra life against burn, at least in this scenario. And it looks like we're going to be able to keep on taking it there with beats using this Mishra's Factory. Going to first drop this Seal of Cleansing though, as I now have tons of extra mana to hold up everything else in my hand, as well as this Dust Bowl activation potentially. And just going to keep on swinging. We played the Fairy Conclave as well, so soon we're going to be swinging for 5 a turn, potentially putting our opponent dead in 2. And that's exactly what I'll do. I'll stand up so that I can swing for a full 5. Opponent does seem to have a spell. They'll go for a Pyroblast on the Fairy. I'm going to Swords it in response so that I can gain my 2 more life. Same kind of rationale as when I did that before in this game. And opponent is also going to go for an Incinerate on the Mishra's Factory. I'm going to counter this because it's their last card in hand and I'm now up to 9 life. I'm not really scared of much off the top of their deck. I feel like I'm in a pretty secure position, being in for 3 every turn. They just top deck a Barbarian Ring, which is quite okay. It could save them from this factory here, but we are able to Dust Bowl it first. And then he's going to use it to kill the soldier, which is totally fine. We still have him dead in 3 turns, hitting with this factory for 2. He fetches down to 3, but it doesn't look like much action. Ooh, Price of Progress. That is terrifying. That would put us down to 1 right now, but I do have my Dust Bowl activation up, so I'm just going to use that to sacrifice one of these non-basics to destroy a non-basic. That way I can keep my life total up and only take 4 damage. Definitely a lot better of an interaction, and we don't really need these lands at this point. Just this factory to keep beating in. Put opponent down to 1. They're going to have to draw out of it here. It's a Mog Fanatic. That doesn't quite do it because we have the Kirtars, and that will do it. Taking down Burn in 2. And in this second game, I'm playing against Replenish. This hand is quite okay. It's 5 lands. They're quite slow lands. Opponent leads on Island. We draw Factor Fiction, which I think is quite strong. Going to be looking to do this Seal of Cleansing on the second turn. Drawing Wrath of God. I didn't know they were on Replenish at the time, but drawing Wrath of God, definitely a weaker draw from the deck. And there's the Ancient Tomb, which kind of reveals the Replenish. Going for Attunement. We're going to be just looking to make our 3rd land drop. I think the Flooded Strand is the best one here for your colored sources. Opponent makes a City of Traders as their land drop and then just passes, which is quite interesting. But they have 6 mana available here and 5 cards with the Attunement, quite scary. But we're just going to keep making lands and staying calm. They're going to go for an Intuition, looking for 3 Opalescence to put 2 into their yard and 1 to their hand, making me think maybe they have Wave and Tide already and they want to discard those 2 Attunement and have the full combo. We'll see. Yeah, they discard looks like a Wave and a Replenish. Or sorry, a Wave, Opalescence, Attunement, and Tide. And now they're going for the Replenish here. Definitely quite scary, and there's no real way we can come back from that. They have the full combo, and we just happen to not have any of our interactive pieces for this matchup. But boarding will be quite simple. Bring in 1 Seal of Cleansing and our 3 Annuls. They're quite good against their bigger artifacts and enchantments. Or, I guess, sorry, just enchantments. It's Replenish after all. We'll take out Humility. It kind of just gets Seal of Cleansing really easily, and we'll take out the Wraths. They're not very impactful. Even Swords isn't very impactful. I'm also taking out the Kirtars. It's just sorcery speed removal, which is not great. They don't really play creatures for the most part. Our hand is quite okay. It is missing white mana, but 2 lands, 5 spells is a pretty okay ratio. And we do have some castable spells, including this turn 2 Standstill, knowing that they're likely to not have a turn 1 play, and the turn 2 Standstill will mostly stick. And here it does, drawing 3 cards. And they're actually going for a morph, which, for those unfamiliar with Premodern, that almost always means Exalted Angel. And I think it's quite interesting because I don't know that the Replenish player is supposed to board in to Exalted Angels. Usually those are something that maybe come in for burn or things like that. Maybe this player thought that I would board out of my removal. I wish I could have actually boarded out of my removal. Like I was saying earlier, I don't think I want swords and stuff for the most part, but I kept them in here and they're looking pretty okay. But I do need to find this white source in order to make things happen. And having to go to discard this last turn was incredibly rough. Would have loved to just spike like a Dark Art Wastes there or something and get this Angel out of here and hold up Counter Magic and all the good stuff, but instead, just going to discard and holding up Counter Magic, which once again is happening this turn. Gonna discard the Decree, it's just way too far off, and all the rest of my hand is quite impactful. I'm gonna end up stifling this Flooded Strand. I think it is pretty necessary so that they couldn't go for some sort of Replenish play with counter backup. Or, yeah, Tide is a lot more reasonable with counter backup. That would have been very scary. So we are going to counter the Tide. That one would have been almost certainly game over if it resolved. They're going to swing in with the Exalted Angel for this 8-point life swing, 4 and 4. And we spike a Flooded Strand off the top. That's amazing. That's going to allow me to cast this Swords to Plowshares, which is definitely the most important thing right now. Make sure that I get off of this 3-turn clock from the Angel. And now that the board is clear, I get to drop a Standstill. Now, the worrying part here, though, is that my opponent is kind of free to do what they want this turn. But they're only going to use it to cast an Attunement, which I actually could even annul. However, I'm not going to. I don't think I would like to use my annul on that when there's things like Wave and Tide and Opalescence in their deck. They're going to play a Meddling Mage on Mana Leak. I actually don't have that card in my hand, though. And here we're able to just slam a Tide because they're completely tapped out. First, I can untap one of my lands, and then I can go for 4 of their lands using a Chain of Vapor. This is also going to let me potentially sack a land to bounce the Meddling Mage. However, I don't go for it. I'd rather just keep all of my lands. And now with opponent on no lands, we're holding up this Annul, and then we're going to be able to trade with the Fairy Conclave to ensure that they are fully locked out of the game. However, they are definitely soft locked out of the game at this point with only this one land drop that they're making. We find another land drop, so quite a few options here. I end up going for a Seal of Cleansing straight into another Tide. That way I can just fully represent the Armageddon combo once again and make sure that they're not able to crawl back into this game, although they are still trying to get aggressive and swinging with this Meddling Mage, but at any time I can hold up my Fairy to block it. So I'm now just going to pass the turn, and we can sit here. They could have a Swords to Plowshares, but if they did, I would have the counter spell, and then we are all good still. And that looks like exactly what's going to happen. They go for the swords. However, I actually don't even bother to use the counter spell because I can just use my own Tide. I have 2 of them, so I'll let this Tide go. But for now, it can take them off of their mana and also protect my Fairy, and the Fairy will come back once the Tide goes away in a couple of turns. Just allows me to really cleanly use that first Tide when I'm holding up the second one for a combo later anyway. And now opponent is going to swing in, no lands in play for them to make any plays with, and I just have the Decree that I drew naturally, which is going to let me eat up this Meddling Mage and get way ahead on board and pretty quickly turn this game around. Killing the Meddling Mage and then also getting a 1 damage swinger. On a 15 turn clock though, not exactly as fast as you would like to see. I'm going to redrop my Tide though, and remember that Fairy is coming off of the first Tide soon, so that will make the damage 3 a turn. And opponent scoops it up. They have had enough. I don't believe I change anything in boarding. I don't think there's anything important. Instead, just focus on getting that seal and those annuls. Those are very, very valuable. Although it is close, and if you want the Kirtars or not, maybe even if you wanted Wrath or God, because they did show us the Meddling Mages. Oh yeah, so I bring back in the Kirtar's Desire and take out a Chain of Vapor because they showed us the creature package with the Exalted Angels and the Meddling Mages, and I just want more removal against that. Definitely you can kind of go against traditional boarding wisdom if you see things like that. So even though Kirtar's Desire may not be a usual card you'd want against Replenish, I saw that they were bringing in a creature package, and as you can see right here, it's kind of like a swords, removing the Exalted Angel for just 1 mana, allowing us to hold up a null. Pretty okay spot. Although we are starting to miss land drops, which is of course unfortunate, but I can just slam a standstill anyway. because they are not really set up to do any replenish plays, and they don't have double blue for Tide. So I'm pretty safe from most of their plays, and they crack my standstill, giving us some more cards, and thankfully we're able to find some more lands off of it. I end up going to play a Dust Bowl, and then actually just passing the turn. So I discard a Dust Bowl and my second Annul. There really just isn't many plays available. I think I need to stop my opponent from potentially going off with Attunement. They can discard really efficiently for Replenish, so I could definitely see a Replenish happening this turn and need to hold up counter magic. But opponent doesn't go for it. They just Replenish, or sorry, Crack Attunement to get some draws and discards. We're just going to keep making line drops. Would love to have more blue mana. Our hand is entirely blue. And opponent goes for a Replenish. However, this attunement that they cracked did not actually get very many powerful things into the yard. It's just the attunement itself and the Parallax Wave. Parallax Wave not very relevant against our deck, although it actually here could exile the Morph to take out the Kirtar's Desire, which is kind of interesting. I'm going to Dust Bowl the Ancient Tomb, taking out the Dust Bowl itself. Just not really going to need it, and I would like to take out their 2 mana while I can to keep them off of Replenish plus counter plays, or really just big 4 mana spell plus a counter. Here they're going to go for Parallax Tide because I took them off the Ancient Tomb. That's kind of going to be their only play, and I'm going to annul it. Here we're just looking to draw more cards, and Factor Fiction is quite a good pickup for that. Definitely going to help us dig deep into the deck and find the lands that we need and just curve out with the rest of the cards that we have. Opponent splits kind of an odd way, giving me 4 lands. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but I'll take the 4 lands and just start dumping where I can. Definitely going to try to get this Tide going, force that last card to be a counter spell because we have the Stifle in hand. Opponent doesn't have it, and there we go. We take round 2 against Replenish. Round 3 here, we're playing against Blue-Green Madness. Hand is quite okay. We do have a good bit of interaction, both of our mana colors, a few lands, all good things that you would love to see in an opener. Drawing the Flood Strain is great, give us a little bit more color access. Kirtar's is okay. From here, I don't know that it's Blue-Green Madness. The Cephalid Colosseum is kind of the first indication. Definitely a spicy one, I would say, although it seems quite good. We're just going to keep developing mana, playing the land drop go game. Our draws have been quite good, so we have a pretty gas hand going forward here. Opponent has not been making any plays. We'll just go for a Factor Fiction on their end step here. They end up dazing our Factor Fiction, which is a super good use out of daze for them, but I don't know if maybe I was supposed to play around that. Let me know what you guys would do in the comments below. I'm just going to stand up a factory here and go swinging. I want to make sure that I keep the pressure up, and I'm still going to be able to hold out my Mana Leak, which is kind of my most relevant spell here, even while pumping with the factory. Opponent's going to play a Basking Root Walla, giving away their own Blue-Green Madness now. Quite favorable matchup, I would say. Oh, I guess I forgot to mention, Replenish is a favorable matchup, definitely, for Blue-White Tide control, but I'll say at the end how all of the matchups feel. We're going to use a Kirtar's Desire to make it so that that Root Walla cannot attack, essentially blanking it. It actually could block there if it wanted to take a Factory's 2 damage away, but not going to be super relevant, so opponent doesn't even bother. And here we have a Tide with the Stifle in hand, which is absolutely amazing, and opponent can't really do anything about it, so we're just going to win it right there. We're going to bring in a Seal of Cleansing and a Wrath of God. Don't really want Stifle in this matchup because they don't play fetch lands or anything like that. And I believe I'm going to also board out of a 4th Parallax Tide just because it's a little bit slow, and they are a deck that is known to get a lot of gas really quickly. And I'm just going to need to have a little bit more interaction for artifacts and enchantments so that I can kill survival, and creatures so that I can kill their board of Root Wallas and things. Hand is quite good here. We're going to open on Fairy Conclave because we have no turn 1 play. Opponent with no turn 1 play, but then a turn 2 Wild Mongrel is quite strong. We're just going to keep making land drops. I don't think I could stand still there. There is maybe an argument that it's possible because I have enough land drops to cycle the decree, but Wild Mongrel is actually a really, really tough one for that because they can discard so many cards and make it absolutely massive. Speaking of which, they discard a Deep Analysis to make it a 3/3, and we take 3 damage here. I'm just going to keep developing on basic islands. I don't need the white source yet. They discard once again, getting a Root Walla into play, and then getting in for a total of 3, so I'm down to 14 now. It's quite an aggressive start from our opponent here. And they have that Deep Analysis ready to be flashed back as well with 3 in hand. I'm going to drop my Seal of Cleansing because I can now do it while still holding up the Mana Leak. Also sets up my Parallax Tide to potentially combo and get rid of all of these lands. They're going to flashback Deep Analysis. I'm going to choose to Mana Leak that. I think that is just a little bit too strong of a play, and I'd like to turn it off. We draw another Seal of Cleansing, so here I'm going to go for a Parallax Tide around Daze. That's the reason to go for the Flooded Strand first. However, they don't have their Daze, they have their Mana Leak, which is kind of their only hard counter magic, so a little unlucky, but makes sense. They want to hold that up, of course. Wild Mongrel coming in, so opponent has quite the big board at this point. I'm only at 11. Here they're even going to pump the Root Walla. Theoretically, they could discard 3 and bring me all the way down to 3 there, which is insane. We don't have an untapped land to play, so it's just going to be the Fairy Conclave into a pass, and it's looking pretty rough here. A lot of creatures swinging in. I have 5 mana, so I'm able to go for a Cycled Decree of Justice for 2. Blocking both of these dogs because both of the Wild Mongrels are actually currently representing lethal. He has 4 cards to discard, so they can both be swinging in for up to 6. Block, block, 1 on each of the dogs, and I'm going to be taking potentially 3 from the Root Walla. Yes, opponent activates it. And I'm down to 2, but I did spike the Wrath of God and a second one off the top. That's how you draw it up, and for 4, I can wipe this all away. Opponent does not have the second Mana Leak, and I get to follow up with a Standstill, which just feels so good. It's going to be very, very hard for our opponent to crawl through and get that last little bit of damage. They're going to drop a Survival, though, which would be quite strong, but we have the Seal of Cleansing already ready before even activating it. When they move phases, we're just going to blow it up, and they don't have a creature to discard. We're just going to keep on hitting land drops, and I'm going to start getting my Seal of Cleansing going into another Standstill with this Mana Leak as extra counter magic, and I'm also just going to be able to beat in for 4 turn with these Fairy Conclaves, and they're already on a 4-turn clock just looking at my lands. However, okay, I do choose to crew up both factories. I wonder if there's an argument to only crew up 1 of the Fairy Conclaves and swing for only 2, but I choose to swing for the full 4, holding up Swords to Plowshares. Hitting another land drop is great because it allows swinging with both Fairy Conclaves and holding up Mana Leak. Opponent with a pretty full grip over there, though, 6 cards, but they don't want to crack this Standstill, putting us to 8 cards. They are going to do it now, though, feeling a little forced. Play a Root Walla, but that's, of course, easy to eat up with our Swords to Plowshares, which we do on their end step. They don't have any pieces of counter magic, instead they just activate it to gain 3. And here we're looking amazing with another Tide. And that's going to do it. They can't come back. GG's. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to like and comment because this took a lot of effort, and the more support we get for the video, the more able I am to do more videos like it. So smash that like button and the subscribe button, and I will catch you all later. Peace.